Okay, we're going to start our next unit right now, which is going to be the biochem or macromolecule or biomolecule, whatever you want to say, it's that unit. So we just spent the last unit talking about atoms and why they form compounds and molecules. And now we're going to take it a step further and say, all right, well, how do we make these complex molecules that make up you and make up me, right? So we are made of molecules, and molecules are just covalently bonded atoms that stick together and have certain properties. So let's get started. Okay, so first off, there's a term which I'm going to be using in here a lot, which is organic compound. Now, the word organic you're probably familiar with. If you go to the grocery store, there's an organic food section, but that is not the same thing. This is a different definition of the term organic. When you see like an organically grown apple or organic whatever at the grocery store, what that means is it was grown without any kind of chemical pesticides. It was all natural. That is not what this means in terms of biology class. What organic means is it means it has two specific elements in it, carbon and hydrogen. So anything that contains both carbon and hydrogen is going to be considered an organic compound. It can have more than that, right? So you can have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. That's still organic. If it has carbon and it has hydrogen in it, it is considered an organic compound. So everything that we're going to be talking about in this unit is going to be organic. So let's keep moving here. So let's talk a little bit about the most important probably element that exists in terms of life, and that is carbon. Everything living on this planet, for the most part, is based around this element we call carbon. Carbon is so important. It's why we're here. If carbon didn't exist, we wouldn't exist. So as important as water is, H2O, carbon is equally important. So we're going to talk about why. Why is carbon such a big deal? So what makes carbon special has to do with its structure. So let's take a minute here and look and see if I can explain it for you. All right, so you might recognize these little structures here I have. These are called connects, right? Connects is a game you can play. So you can make something very complex like this Ferris wheel. And over here I have a bunch of pictures of the different connects pieces. Why is that over there? Well, I'll explain in a minute. Let's talk about carbon for a minute. So carbon has 6 electrons in it. So it has 2 in the outer ring. And then that means it has 2 in the inner ring, and that means it has 4 in its outer ring. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now what that means is it's missing 4 electrons, right? So in order for this thing to become stable, it needs to combine with some other elements to get more electrons. And what makes carbon so special is that it has 4 open spaces on the atom, and it can form 4 bonds with 4 other elements, and that allows for something very important. So let's talk about this connects over here real quick. So if you take a look over here, I have these connects pieces. We have some that are straight that look like this, and then we have some that are round that you can fit a lot more pieces on, right? So let's take a look and see what I'm talking about here. So let's say I have a piece that looks like this, that is just straight, right? It's just a straight one. That is not a great piece if you're trying to get real fancy with what you're trying to make. All you can do here is make a 2-dimensional piece, right? So I can make a long line like this, but I can never make something that looks like this if all I have is this type of piece. If I have this piece though, let's say I have the circular piece over here that has more openings on it. Well, now if I have 4 little, sticks or whatever, I can make something that is 3-dimensional. So I can build something that looks like this if I have something that looks like that. So what makes carbon so special is that carbon has the ability to make very complex connections. If it was just something that looked like this, if it could only make 2, let's say it could only make 2 connections, right? Let's say it couldn't make these here. What you would end up with is a whole bunch of molecules that were just straight lines. And if I want to build a house, I can never build a house out of just a 2-dimensional piece, right? I need to be able to build down and I need to be able to build up. So this is an example of why carbon is so special. Let me erase this just so we can use this diagram later. All right, cool. Now let's go back to the notes just to make sure we understand how these relate. So if you take a look here, what makes carbon so special is it has 4 free electrons in its outer ring, and that allows it to bond with up to 4 other covalent bonds. So it can make very complex structures. Now there are 3 types of bonds that can form when you're talking about a carbon. It can form single bonds, double bonds, or triple bonds. So let me explain that. I'm going to go back to that diagram I just used to explain that. So let's say I have 2 carbon molecules. I can form 3 possible bonds with them. The first one is going to be a single bond. So if I form a single bond, what that means is it has the ability to still form much more relationships with other elements. So it would be like if I had 4 hands and I was only holding out one hand. What you're going to get here is you're going to get a weak bond compared to the other 2, but it's going to be able to combine, bond with some other, so I can get something that looks like this, right? So I'm going to get a more complex structure if I have a single bond. The second type of bond is a double bond. That would be like if I was holding with 2 hands. But the problem with this is I can now only form 2 other connections because now I can only, make something that looks like this. And then the third type of bond is a triple bond. These aren't as common. And that leaves us the ability to only make something that looks like this. So if I go back to my connects example, this is like that 2-dimensional scenario. So this is not ideal if you're trying to build something complex, but it's good if you're trying to make something that's hard to break. You'd have to break all 3 of these bonds to break that element apart, the compound apart. This one is much weaker, but you can make a much more complex structure with it. So which is better, a single bond, a double bond, or a triple bond? Well, it all depends on what you're trying to make. A single bond is better if you want to make a very complex structure with lots of different, pieces to it. But you're not going to have a very strong bond here, so you can break it if you needed to, right? So if I needed to break this bond, it would be much easier to break that bond because there's only one. A double bond is going to be much stronger than a single bond, but it's going to give up some of its ability to form complex structures. And then finally, a triple bond is the strongest of all, but it's very limited in how complex the structure can be. So it depends on the scenario, but if you have a double bond, it's going to be much stronger than a single bond, and then a triple bond is going to be even stronger than that. So if you take a look down here, single bonds, they each only share 1 electron, double bonds, they share 2, and triple bonds, they share 3. So carbon is very special because it can form up to 4 bonds, but it could have a single bond, a double bond, or a triple bond. Let's finish up here with just some definitions. Macro means large, right? So a macromolecule is a large molecule that is made up of hundreds, if not thousands of atoms or more, right? They can also vary in size. You can have a smaller macromolecule, like a simple carbohydrate, or you can have a super complex macromolecule like a protein. So just know that a macromolecule is a molecule that is made up of many, it's a very large molecule made up of many atoms. So another term you need to know is a polymer. Poly means many. So a polymer is a large macromolecule. So a macromolecule can be small or large. A polymer is a very large one. So it's formed when you have many smaller ones bonded together, and they usually form like long chains. So one example would be glucose combining with fructose to make something called sucrose. So you might have heard of glucose before, and you probably have heard of sucrose before. Sucrose is sugar. So sucrose would be an example of 2 smaller molecules that bond together. That is called a polymer. The next concept I'm going to teach you in the next lecture. So we're going to stop there for right now.